especially when I first started writing for others in the concert space, I was really nervous about what the performers were going to think or like what the audience was going to think. And it was very
Oh
much
yeah.
like worried about just like what other people were thinking. And I feel like I very much had to tell myself, you got to let go of any expectations you have for that aspect of it. Like, that really doesn't matter. All that matters is if you enjoy what you're creating. For me, that is actually really matters because I've written some pieces where I was trying some really cool extended techniques or whatever. And then I like listen back and I'm like, this is just not me. It didn't feel like I was reaching deep within. And so I think letting go of expectations in that regard, but then also letting go of expectations when it comes to the actual creative process, especially when you have like a deadline. I feel like it's really scary to think about, oh, okay, my deadline's coming up in 2 weeks and I have nothing on the page. What am I going to do? I have
Yeah.
been in that position.
Oh yeah, me too.
I'm sure everyone has, but yeah, it is not a fun position to be in. And I feel like, I'm sorry, this is kind of a ramble. I apologize. But it kind of ties into my entire process as a whole as of recently, because when I was in school, I very much relied on anxiety to push me through to the deadline and procrastination as well. I was very like, I procrastinated the actual piece for a very long time. And then it wasn't until recently that I realized it wasn't actually procrastination. I was thinking about the piece basically every moment of every time that I had a moment to think about the piece. And it was being written in my brain while I was thinking about it, which sounds silly, but I feel like a lot of composers don't give themselves credit for like thinking and the time that we need away, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I don't want to interrupt because I want you to keep going, but I just want to say what you just said is so important and was like a realization for me too that again going back to like as composers there's so much pressure especially from like in academic institutions to
Yes.
produce like get your stuff out there. I mean, the algorithms kind of put pressure on us too in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But this idea of like actually I can be composing without anything, without any tool, just like my brain. And
Yes.
that was such a game changer shift in perspective for me personally. So you're asking about my process. That's a big part of my process actually too.
Yes. Staying away from the page and just like living your life. I feel like that like I it's it's such a game changer for me, at least, because I just really thought that I was procrastinating. I really thought that I had nothing in there. And then all of a sudden, the 2 week deadline comes and I'm like, I have a whole piece. Where did this even come from? It just appeared. But really it was, months of sitting there and thinking about what you want. And I feel like, it's really, I feel like it's important that people know that that is a part of the process, because looking back at like younger me, I was so hard on myself for being that way and like, being fueled by anxiety for sure. And I think now, I mean, especially just my work life, my day-to-day work life looks so different than it did back in school, but
Yeah.
I really feel like even when it comes to songwriting, like it's the same exact thing for me. I think about a song for a very long time. I usually have that one improvisation or one recording, and then I just go back to it once, maybe a year later. I mean, it could be a long time. It could be a couple weeks, just depending on what the scope of when you want to finish the thing is. But you go back and you know exactly what you want. And that's because you spent so much time with it, in your brain. And I don't know, that's that's I had to let go of the expectation that like every day I would write like however many measures or whatever, because that's just not that doesn't work for everybody. So that's my first pillar. I'm so sorry.
No,
I'll
that's
just
awesome.
list the rest of them.
No,
Um,
let's dig in.
the second one I had was just encouraging play. So like, encouraging, just allowing yourself to like play with the music and have fun. Because I always thought it was so serious, it has to be a serious thing. I think the improvisatory process for me is just a part of that. But then the next one I had was don't be afraid of leaning into something familiar. And I think this one was like a huge one for me because it still is. I mean, I feel like in the same harmonic sound world for the last like 5 years. Like, I just love the same kinds of chords. I love the same meditative, like flowy spaces. And I think in school, a lot of the time, and I mean, this could still be true. It's just been a while since I've been in school. So I feel like I was, encouraged to try different things and different styles. And when I say styles, I guess I mean like, just making sure that every piece doesn't sound exactly the same.
Right.
And so I feel like, I don't know, that was something I was always really concerned about, is like, oh, all of my pieces sound the same. Like, what do I do? What if I do if they all sound exactly the same? And I feel like, you know, for me, I still am allowed to be in that same sound world that I'm really excited about, but I do usually try something a little bit different each time. So it's kind of like reconciling that for me, but allowing yourself to just be in something that's familiar if you want to be. Like if it's a goal for you to go completely outside of your comfort zone, which is like the next one that I have, is trying something new, or going outside of your comfort zone is also equally as important. And that doesn't have to be like something crazy, like, writing a piece in a completely different style from what you're used to that you don't even know if you enjoy, or like an instrumentation that maybe will never get performed because it's so crazy or something. Like, you don't have to make it that extreme. You can if you want. It's a fun exercise, it's a fun experiment, but I think knowing that you're trying something new or trying to go a little bit outside of your comfort zone from the last time you wrote something is important to me, at least in my practice. So those are what I came up with.
No,
Sorry.
I love that last point, and I have to say that one of the most important statements about composing, and again, this important to me, your mileage may vary. One of the most important statements that I just kind of overheard someone say about another composer, and this other composer said this about their body of work in general, and that's it's all just one big piece. and
Yes.
and that, like, to me, that unlocks something like kind of what you're talking about, where again it takes that pressure off of like reinventing the wheel every time. And so, ever since I heard that, I think about each piece as like just an extension of the one that came before it. And yes, I want it to be like a little more mature. I want it to be a little more in a certain direction, maybe, but taking that pressure off. That again, it's pressure that like we kind of pick up from academia for better or for worse. I think it does serve a purpose then, but once you kind of grow up, and I'm doing air quotes there. Once you grow up, you're allowed to, well, like what you're saying, kind of live with what you want to live with and do with it what you want to do with it. So I appreciate that.
I feel like it's so important because a lot of people always talk about like and I'm also saying this in quotations, finding your sound. Like, I feel like that's like the one question that everyone asks, like, how do you find your sound? And it's like, I don't even know if that's real. The concept of that, I feel like I could unpack that for a while, but I feel like it's mostly like you said, it's just viewing your art making as a continuation instead of oh, this is a new piece, this is a new instrumentation, this is a new ensemble, this is a completely new thing that I have to do each time. I feel like not viewing it as a blank slate, which is funny because my band is called Blank Slate, but not viewing it as a blank slate is important. It helps you kind of be in touch with who you are, because I feel like a lot of composing is who we are. Like, it's very much a self-identification of who we are. So I feel like that's important.
No, I mean, you're talking about these pillars kind of through the lens of being a composer. I'm sure that it also manifests in your work with, I mean, being in a band is more collaborative,
Yeah.
songwriting and whatnot. I mean, do you, as either as a band with your bandmates or just your own kind of influence over that process, do you feel the same way as you do with your individual compositions for the concert stage?
I definitely do. I feel like, I mean, collaboration is such a special thing, because I feel like a lot of those kind of pillars just aren't talked about, but they just appear. They just happen naturally, which is why I love. I mean, I know that most of the time it happens naturally without having to think about it on the solo aspect of things, or being a capital C composer, but I feel like even just thinking back to like the band that I just referenced, Blank Slate, that's my fiance and I's band, and we've been playing together since we were 14, but we've been writing together since I want to say we started it when we were 17. And it's been a long time, basically.
Yeah.
And even then, like, just viewing our creative process back then versus now, it's so different, and it's because we kind of changed as artists and as collaborators. I've always been a very collaborative, like, let's jam it out person. I love that kind of collaboration, but my fiance was more of a kind of like solo writer who would come to these practices and have a full fleshed out finished song. And at the time, I feel like, well, I wrote my album because I didn't know if I could write a full song. Like I really, it was almost like a challenge to me to like write a full, which sounds so silly at like looking back, but it was a challenge to myself to be able to write like a full, song with all the instrumentations and things I wanted to do that I felt like I was a little bit insecure about writing because I've always in a collaborative setting, the drummer writes the drummer's parts, the guitarist writes the guitarist parts, I write my parts, and that's how it goes usually. And writing my album was like a test to like, can I do this myself? Like, could I actually do all of those things? And I did, and now I feel really comfortable doing it, which feels really silly saying that out loud, but I feel like, so my fiance's name is John, and like our process has like evolved so much collaboratively. Now we have a very similar process as I have to, writing my own solo stuff. And I think those pillars of being willing to just try new things and see where it goes that's like the biggest one that we have really been leaning into. I think also just like being really intentional about the decisions you make, because I had mentioned earlier how I'm like an improvisatory person, and like what I usually improvise just is what happens and there's not a ton of changes and stuff. I think that's great until lyric writing becomes involved. And when I was younger, the lyrics that I wrote when I was younger were very much like on the way to the studio, write them out and record them. And that was it. And I was very not intentional. But that to me felt like freeing almost, because it was a contrast to being so intentional with the concert composition. Now I'm like very intentional with my lyrics, because I think for me, like lyricism is like kind of defining what you want to say as an artist, which sounds kind of silly, but because there are a bunch of bands that just write lyrics that don't really have a lot of meaning to them or to maybe like the general audience, but like they do have a lot of meaning, I feel like they always carry meaning. And for me, like what I want to say, I really didn't know what I wanted to say for a long time. I was like, what do I really have to say as an artist? I don't know. So I had to like unpack that and think about the kind of themes and threads that follow me throughout my life. And so now I feel like my lyric writing is very, very intentional. So I feel like those pillars definitely bleed into the other aspects of, collaborative writing and songwriting, especially, for sure.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.